Snow fell softly from the grey sky, blanketing the world in silence. It was the kind of quiet only winter could bring, still, breathless, heavy with cold. Along the edge of a forgotten railway track on the outskirts of a small town, two little girls trudged through the slush, their boots soaked and their laughter echoing through the chill. Lila, 9, clutched her sister Zoe's hand as they made their usual walk home from school. They wore jackets too big for them, donated last Christmas, and mismatched gloves, but they didn't complain. They had each other, and today, they were pretending to host a tea party for their invisible guests. Cardboard cookies, pinacone muffins, and peppermint air tea. Lady Zoe, Lila said in a posh accent, would you care for another biscuit? Zoe giggled and held out an imaginary plate. Only if it's got extra sprinkles. They laughed, their cheeks rosy from the cold, the innocence in their voices warming the frozen evening. That's when Lila suddenly stopped. A breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening as she stared ahead. Zoe bumped into her and followed her sister's gaze. There, just beyond a rusted bench that hadn't seen paint in years, lay a man. He was crumpled awkwardly in the snow, his face buried in his arm, one leg twisted unnaturally beneath him. Snowflakes had started to cover his dark coat, and steam rose faintly from his back, like the last breath of something dying. Zoe whispered, Is he dead? Lila shook her head, stepping cautiously forward. No, she said after a moment, he's breathing. Look at his back. They dropped their bags and rushed to him. Lila knelt by his side, brushing snow from his face. Hue was pale, lips tinged blue, and his skin felt like ice. His eyelashes were frozen. He groaned softly, a fragile sound, like a thread holding him to life. Zoe hesitated. What do we do? Lila pulled off her scarf and wrapped it around his hands. We have to help him, he's freezing. Zoe quickly followed, wrapping her scarf around his other hand. They looked down at the stranger, their scarves barely enough to warm a man twice their size, but it was all they had. Lila stood and shouted, toward the empty tracks, help somebody, please. No one answered. The wind whistled through broken fences and the distant sound of a train horn echoed far away, too far to matter. Zoe knelt beside the man, rubbing his hand between hers, shivering. I think he's really sick, she said softly. Why is he here? Doesn't he have a home? Lila swallowed the lump in her throat. I don't know. They stayed there, kneeling in the snow, calling for help between sobs, their faces stinging from the cold. 10 minutes felt like hours until finally, the sound of boots crunching in the snow came from behind. An old man from the town, Mr. Jenkins, the station cleaner, appeared from the road, his eyes wide with shock. What in heaven's name? Girls, what happened? We found him, Lila cried. He needs help, please. Without hesitation, Mr. Jenkins pulled out his phone and called an ambulance, then draped his coat over the man's body. He looked at the girls, shaking, cheeks streaked with tears, snow covering their hair, and realized they'd been trying to keep this man alive with nothing but their tiny hands and thin scarves. Minutes later, sirens cut through the silence. Paramedics lifted the man onto a stretcher. One of them said quietly, You may have saved his life. Lila and Zoe didn't understand what they had just done. All they knew was that someone needed help and they had tried. They stood together, holding hands in the snow, watching the ambulance disappear into the distance, never imagining that the man they saved wasn't just a stranger. He was one of the richest men in the country, a lost soul who had walked away from everything, until two little girls found him and gave him something no money could ever buy, a reason to keep breathing. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and old sadness. Flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows on the scuffed tile floors, and the beige walls were stained with time and stories no one talked about. It was the only hospital in town, underfunded, overcrowded, and held together by the sheer will of a few kind-hearted nurses who did what they could with what they had. Lila and Zoe sat quietly on a cold bench in the hallway, their small legs swinging off the edge, not quite touching the floor. Their coats were still damp from the snow. Zoe leaned her head on Lila's shoulder, her fingers fidgeting with the torn edge of her sleeve. Across the hall, behind a curtain and a closed door, the man they'd found by the railway lay unconscious. The nurses had rushed him in, hooked him up to machines that beeped and blinked, and whispered words like hypothermia and severe exhaustion, but no one knew who he was. A nurse approached, crouching in front of the girls. Her eyes were soft but tired. You girls did a very brave thing, she said gently. You might have saved his life. Lila nodded, but didn't speak. She was watching the closed door, wondering if the man had family, if someone was looking for him. The nurse continued. He had no ID, no phone, just this. She held up a soggy, weathered wallet in a plastic bag. Inside was a photo, a woman with kind eyes and dark hair, cradling a baby boy. Their smiles were wide, full of love. The ink was smudged from water damage, but the image still held something sacred. Do you know him? The nurse asked, almost without hope. Both girls shook their heads. No name, the nurse said with a sigh. We'll have to wait until he wakes up. If he wakes up. She stood and gently patted Zoe's head before walking away, leaving them alone again with the hum of machines and the quiet shuffle of hospital staff. After a long silence, Zoe reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper with tiny fingers. She began folding it with slow precision, creasing it carefully, turning it into something more than just paper. Lila watched, curious, until she saw what it was. A crane. It wasn't perfect, the wings were uneven, and the folds were lopsided, but it was beautiful in its own way. Zoe stood up, walked quietly into the man's room while the nurses weren't looking, and approached his bed. He looked so different now, cleaned up, warm, but still unconscious. His face was handsome but weary, like someone who had once carried the weight of the world and then let it all fall. She slipped a little paper crane into the fold of his blanket near his chest. In case you get lonely, she whispered. It's a lucky one, I made it just for you. She stood there for a moment, her small hand resting on the edge of the bed. The man didn't move, didn't stir, but somewhere inside, something softened as if that small gesture reached through the darkness. Zoe returned to her sister, and they sat together in silence again, their eyes tired but calm. They didn't know the man in that bed was Nathaniel Pierce, a billionaire tech genius, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, a man who had disappeared weeks ago after a mental breakdown no one understood, not even him. He had walked away from a penthouse, a corporate empire, and every person who ever said they admired him, because he no longer believed in himself. But two little girls did without knowing his name, his power, or his past. All they saw was someone who needed kindness. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Rain tapped steadily against the cracked windows of the orphanage, turning the small gravel yard outside into puddles and mud. Inside, the walls were painted, a tired yellow, peeling in corners, the air filled with a faint scent of soup from the kitchen and wet clothes hanging to dry. It was just another grey afternoon in a place the world often forgot. Lila and Zoe sat cross-legged in the common room, playing a quiet game of Guess the Animal using hand shadows against the flickering light of a single lamp. Their laughter was soft, tired. It had been weeks since that snowy night by the tracks. The man they saved had become just a memory, a mystery they sometimes whispered about before sleep, wondering if he ever woke up, or if he even remembered them at all. No one had come looking for them, no newspaper story, no thank you cards. Just the same old routine, school, chores, bedtime stories, recycled from frayed books. Then, without warning, the sound of tires crunching gravel broke the rainy lull. Sister Agnes, the kind but overworked caretaker, peeked out the front window, her brows furrowed at the sight of a sleek black SUV pulling into the muddy driveway, a car far too clean, far too expensive for this part of town. The engine stopped. For a moment, no one moved. Then the door opened. A tall man stepped out, his charcoal coat billowing slightly in the wind. The rain slicked back his dark hair, revealing a faint scar on his forehead. He looked older than he probably was, his face marked by something deeper than age, the kind of wear that comes from having lost yourself and somehow clawed your way back. Nathaniel Pierce stood still, staring up at the crumbling brick. I'm looking for two sisters, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Lila and Zoe. Sister Agnes narrowed her eyes. Why? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something carefully wrapped in plastic, a small, slightly crumpled paper crane with faded stars. They saved my life. Moments later, Lila and Zoe appeared at the end of the hallway. Zoe held onto her sister's hand tightly. Lila's eyes widened as she saw him, the man from the snow, the man from the hospital, the man they weren't sure they'd ever see again. Nathaniel took a slow breath and crouched slightly, lowering himself to their eye level. I was lost, he said, his voice low and trembling. I didn't think anyone would care if I disappeared, but two little girls reminded me I was still human. Asterisk Zoe blinked up at him. You remembered us. Asterisk he nodded, smiling gently. Every day. Asterisk Leela looked down at the paper crane in his hand, and then up at the man now standing tall and steady. There was something different about him now. The sadness in his eyes had softened. The weight hadn't vanished, but it was lighter. Asterisk without another word. Both girls stepped forward and hugged him. Nathaniel closed his eyes as their small arms wrapped around him. For the first time in a very long time, he felt grounded, not by wealth, not by status, but by something far more precious, the kindness of two little girls who had nothing, and gave everything anyway. Asterisk behind them, the rain continued to fall, but inside that crumbling building, something warm and whole was taking root, a new beginning quietly unfolding. Born from the simplest act of compassion, Asterisk the kitchen smelled faintly of overcooked rice and dish soap. Its linoleum floor was cracked in places, and the tiny table in the corner wobbled whenever anyone leaned on it too hard. But to Leela and Zoe, it was the perfect place for something important, a tea party. Asterisk they had prepared it with care. A faded pink cloth covered the table, slightly stained from years of use. Plastic teacups in mismatched colors sat in front of each seat. In the center, on a chipped plate, were 4 cookies, slightly stale but still precious. A teapot with nothing but warm water and imagination sat beside a jar of sugar cubes that had turned hard. Asterisk Nathaniel sat on the floor beside them, his long legs folded awkwardly, his suit jacket removed and sleeves rolled up. It was the most informal he'd felt in years, yet it felt right. He watched as Zoe carefully poured the tea, a tongue sticking out in concentration, while Leela handed him a cookie with practiced elegance. Asterisk your tea, sir, Zoe said, grinning proudly. Special blend. Only for guests we like. Asterisk he chuckled, cradling the plastic cup like it was fine china. I'm honored. Asterisk they chatted between sips and bites, laughter echoing against the kitchen's old walls. The girls spoke of school, the games they played, and the stories they made up when the lights went out early and the power cut off. Nathaniel listened intently, smiling more than he had in years. Then came the moment he didn't expect. What do you want to be when you grow up? He asked gently. Asterisk Leela's face lit up. A nurse, she said. I want to help people get better, like the ones who helped you in the hospital. Asterisk Zoe nodded excitedly. And I'm gonna have a bakery. A big one, with pink cupcakes and warm bread, and no one has to pay if they're sad. Asterisk, Nathaniel's chest tightened. Something in their voices, the purity of their dreams, the certainty that kindness could fix the world reached deep into places he thought were long sealed off. Asterisk he looked down, suddenly overwhelmed. A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it quickly, but the girls noticed. Asterisk, are you okay? Leela asked, her voice soft. Asterisk, I'm more than okay, he whispered. I'm just grateful. Asterisk he reached into his coat, folded beside him on the floor, and carefully pulled out a small laminated object. The paper crane, still slightly crumpled, but protected now, preserved. He held it in his palm like a treasure. Asterisk this, he said, voice cracking, this is why I came back. Asterisk, Zoe leaned closer, eyes wide. You kept it. Asterisk, he nodded. It reminded me that there's still good in the world, even when everything feels lost. Asterisk, the girls exchanged a smile, and Zoe said proudly, told you it was a lucky one. Asterisk Nathaniel laughed, a deep, honest sound that surprised even him, and for a moment, the world outside didn't matter, not the corporations, the meetings, the cold penthouses, or the mistakes he'd made. Only this moment existed. 2 little girls, a paper crane, and the quiet redemption of a man who had nearly given up. Asterisk, he didn't say it yet, but he knew then, he wasn't just going to visit, he was going to stay. The sun broke through the morning clouds, casting a golden glow over a quiet street that had once been lined with broken windows and faded memories. Where the old orphanage once stood, the building with peeling paint and cracked glass now stood something entirely new. Bright, alive, hopeful. Asterisk, a tall white banner fluttered in the breeze. Grand opening, the Zoe and Leela Foundation Children's. Laughter rang from the colorful playground beside the building. Reporters gathered near a makeshift stage where balloons danced in the wind, and townspeople stood shoulder to shoulder, bundled in coats and scarves, eyes full of curiosity and warmth. Asterisk at the center of it all, flanked by a ribbon stretched across the entryway, stood 2 little girls, now not so little. Lila, poised and graceful, held one handle of the oversized scissors, while Zoe, still full of spark, held the other. Their cheeks were flushed, not from the cold, but from the shy pride that comes when the world is finally looking and seeing you for the first time. Behind them stood Nathaniel Pierce, no longer in the polished armor of a corporate giant, no longer hidden behind wealth and titles. He wore a simple black coat, a soft smile, and eyes that had known both the darkest night and the warmth of second chances. He placed a gentle hand on each girl's shoulder. Asterisk, you ready? He whispered. Asterisk, Leela nodded. Zoe grinned, and with a single snip, the ribbon fell. Applause erupted. Flashbulbs lit up. Asterisk, and just like that, a new chapter began. Asterisk inside, the community center buzzed with activity. Bright classrooms, a kitchen stocked with warm meals, cozy reading corners, rows of bunk beds with fresh linens. Children ran down the hallways laughing. Volunteers sorted donated clothes. Teachers prepared chalkboards for lessons. Asterisk. Every detail of the center had a purpose to serve children like Leela and Zoe once were, forgotten, overlooked, dreaming quietly of something more. Asterisk. Nathaniel walked through the halls with them, stopping. At a wall near the entrance, framed in glass, was a small display. A paper crane, slightly crumpled, perfectly preserved. Beneath it, a plaque read, Asterisk, kindness is never wasted. Asterisk. A reporter approached Nathaniel outside and asked, what inspired this? Why here? Why now? Asterisk. He looked down at the girls beside him. Leela reached for his hand. Zoe rested her head against his arm. Nathaniel smiled, and after a long pause, he answered honestly, because I was lost once, and two little girls reminded me what it means to be human. They gave without knowing who I was. They didn't see power or money. They saw someone who needed help, and they didn't hesitate. Asterisk. The reporter scribbled notes. Moved by the simplicity of the truth, asterisk. Nathaniel looked out over the playground, the building, the lives already changing. Asterisk. They saved me, he said, and now I want this place to do the same for others. Asterisk. The crowd began to thin and the day carried on. A quiet moment settled over the three of them. Lila and Zoe leaned against Nathaniel on a bench, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. Asterisk. And in that golden silence, a gentle voice echoed like a final chapter in a book. One freezing night, two little girls chose kindness over fear. Didn't know who he was, they only knew he needed help, and because of that one small act, hundreds of lives changed forever.